So this feast day of the Holy Family is a great reminder that the family is called to grow in holiness, that the point of family life isn't to see who gets the bigger bedroom or gets more food at dinner time or who gets the remote or whatever people fight over now. Those are the kind of things that my dad and I fought over. I didn't have siblings, but my father was like a child sometimes. But my mother said that anyway. But family life is about growing in holiness, and that we're called to help each other grow in holiness. That's the whole goal, friends, is that we get to heaven. And you only get to heaven if you're holy. If you don't grow in holiness, you probably won't get to heaven, and then you're in big trouble, right? And so that's why we have the church and the sacraments and prayer and the devotional life. And that's why the sacrament of marriage is focused on the two becoming one flesh, right? The point of marriage isn't so that you have somebody to live with the rest of your life, but it's that you have someone to hold you accountable to grow in holiness. That's the point of marriage. You finally find someone that you know and you trust and you love, that they love, trust, and respect you in return, and that together you will help each other get into heaven. And if God grants you with the blessings of children, then you're in charge of getting them into heaven as well until they find their vocation and then they continue on their own path, whether that's whatever their vocation may be, right? And so the whole point is holiness. And we look to the Holy Family of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph as a great model of what that holiness looks like. And it's really easy to kind of poo-poo the feast day and be like, well, okay, the mother was immaculately conceived, the son is God, and Joseph didn't talk. So yeah, of course they were holy, right? And we can just kind of ignore the whole feast day. But our gospel shows us they were a real family, right? The immaculately conceived Virgin Mother of God and her quiet husband lost God. They lost him. A whole day they were in a caravan full of people and they lost the baby Jesus. He wasn't a baby, he was 12, but still. They lost God. And they frantically looked for him. Now, you know, Luke, in his probably very broken English translation here, you know, Mary goes up to him and says, oh, we were looking for you with great anxiety. I'm sure she didn't say it quite so eloquently. I'm sure she yelled at him. And if I were Jesus and I responded to my parents with, well, didn't you know that I would just be in my dad's house? I probably would have got smacked, right? It's like Jesus is talking back to his parents. But they were a real family, right? And the gospel shows this to us. That they weren't perfect. I mean, Mary, yes, she's perfect in that she didn't sin and she's human. Jesus is perfect in that he's God. But from the outside looking in, their family looked normal. They were just a regular family, a mom, a dad, and a son, trying to just make it work, right? Which is what we're all trying to do. We're just trying to make it work. And ultimately, trying to grow in holiness. And so the Holy Family is a model because they're all human. They all have human natures. Mary and Joseph are human persons, Jesus the divine person, but they all have human natures. They all had feelings. They all had desires. They all had temptations, right? Jesus, while it wasn't a bad thing that he was in the temple praising God and discussing the deeds of his Father, that's not a bad thing, but he didn't follow his parents like he was supposed to. His parents got a little angry, because a justified anger, that their son wasn't with them. And so they came back, found him, and their family was restored, right? Not that it was broken, but from the outside looking in, it's a regular family. Even look at his own birth, right? 12 years before this scene happens. Everyone thinks that Mary cheated on Joseph. Everyone thinks that Joseph is just doing some charity work by not divorcing Mary, even though everyone thinks that she cheated on him. And then when Jesus is born, they're in this little know-nothing shepherd's village for the census, and they couldn't even get a real place to stay. They had to be in a barn, essentially, right? That just looks like something on the Maury Show, written all over it. But it's the Holy Family. We know who they are, and we know what they teach us to grow in holiness. And that's how we should look at them, as the model and example. So that when we get in the midst of our own family lives and we don't feel perfect and we don't feel like we've got it all together and we don't feel like it's going to plan, whatever that plan was, you can just look to Mary, Joseph, and Jesus and see how we can continue as a family to model them so that we can continue on our goal to get into heaven. And the best examples of it really are our parish family and your own little families, right? So the church calls smaller families the domestic church. And so your family homes are little parishes, right? So I think the easiest way to remember it is, so St. Edward is the Diocese of Mayfair. Father Anderson is the bishop. I'm the auxiliary bishop. And you parents are all pastors of your little church of the Nyberg family and the church of the Danahy family and so on, right? So you are the pastors, and your children and relatives then are your parishioners when they're over in your home, right? And so together, just as Father Anderson and I, as your spiritual fathers, we are here to help you grow in holiness. You help us grow in holiness. So in your families, you help your children grow in holiness. Your children help you to grow in holiness. And for those who are in the single life, you're still called to be in heaven. You're still called to be a saint. And so your own family, whatever that looks like, whether it's with friends or blood relatives, you're there too to call each other out, to be accountable, to love others, and ultimately to become saints. And that is the goal, always in saecula saeculorum, to get into heaven. And so, friends, as we celebrate our great Holy Family, let's recommit ourselves to working on our own personal holiness so that we can get into heaven. And let's also work on helping those we love around us in our families, whether blood or friendly, that we will help each other to get into heaven so that we can all be seated around the Lamb like we do here on Sundays with our family of families and worship the one true God who is love.